Now that we know about the meteorology of the event, let's see some of the impacts that it had. The impacts that the storm left on the area that Columbia's in and the area surrounding it were severe and long-lasting, especially around the Gills Creek watershed, which I am at today. According to the National Weather Service data from the Gills Creek Observation Station, the area recorded its highest level since monitoring began in 1965. It reached a peak of 19.6 feet, with flood stage being defined as 6.7 feet. What truly made the flood so disastrous around Gills Creek was not only that it was an urban area, but multiple dams upstream of this area had failed in the aftermath of the storms. While pretty much every dam in the watershed was overtopped, the major problem came with a series of dam failures, which caused a sort of domino effect. First, Carey's Lake Dam, also known as Arcadia Lake Dam, failed. The next day, the Upper Rockyford Lake Dam failed, which caused the Lower Rockyford Lake Dam to fail soon after. Arguably, the most photographed locations throughout the coverage of the flooding and inundation were in this area, being the tidal mats and subway. Elsewhere in the Midlands, river levels also reached a new all-time high at the Saluda River at Lake Murray at 27.5 feet. The floodgates of the Dreher Shoals Dam, commonly known as the Lake Murray Dam, were opened for the first time since 1969 in order to maintain lake levels under 360 feet. In addition, floodwaters coming from both the Saluda and Broad rivers combined to mark the 8th highest river level on the Congaree recorded since 1900. The Congaree River in Columbia reached 31.81 feet, with its flood stage being defined as 19 feet. This caused the Columbia Canal, a reservoir that diverts water from the Congaree to the Columbia Water Plant, as well as for hydroelectric generation, to be breached. The town of Lexington also experienced quite severe flooding due to the failure of multiple dams. 3 dams broke along 12 Mile Creek. These were the Bar Lake Dam, the Gibson's Pond Dam, and the Old Mill Pond Dam. This caused the Old Mill District to flood. The effects of this were large amounts of damage, with many of the lower floors on the property being 3 to 4 feet underwater. Truly the craziest part of the event was just how much precipitation fell around Columbia and within the state. However, it must also be noted that while a lot of precipitation fell within the city of Columbia, the most precipitation did not fall within the city. At the Columbia Metropolitan Airport, located behind me, the greatest one-day and the greatest two-day rainfall totals were set in October of 2015, on October 3rd and October 4th. Elsewhere in the state, at the Charleston Airport, the greatest 1, 2, 3, 4, and the greatest October monthly rainfall records were set. To put into perspective just how much rain fell during the event, some parts of the state received almost half of their average annual rainfall totals in the course of only a few days. The areas most impacted by the heavy rainfall totals were the Midlands and the Low Country, with much of the upstate being spared both the heavier rainfall and generally just having the geographic advantage of being upstream of the areas with heavier rainfall. The Midlands and Low Country are divided into 3 weather forecasting offices, located in Columbia, Charleston, and Wilmington, North Carolina. In the service area of the Columbia Weather Forecast Office, total amounts greater than 20 inches fell in both Columbia and Sumter. On October 3rd, 2015, the highest tide since Hurricane Hugo was recorded in the Charleston Harbor. In the areas surrounding Charleston and the Low Country within the WFO Charleston service area, the most significant flooding occurred near small creeks, streams, and tributaries feeding into the Edisto, Ashley, Cooper, and Santee rivers. These photos are from Andrews, South Carolina, a town that straddles the border from Williamsburg and Georgetown counties and is within the Wilmington WFO. Because of significant inflows, the Santee River at nearby Jamestown was expected to rise above major flood stage on October 10th. The longest lasting of the storm's effects have been its damage to infrastructure within the state. One of the largest and most important pieces of infrastructure that was damaged by the storm is the Columbia Canal. FEMA and the City of Columbia have worked together and have identified $42 million in damages. A 3-phase plan has been created in order to repair the remaining damages as well as mitigate future issues with the city's water supply. A $12 million project will replace the headgates on the canal and will allow for the resumption of operations of the hydroelectric station at the south end of the canal. This project is funded through the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery, and bidding is expected to start in the beginning of 2024. Phase 2 will involve repairing the canal embankment as well as a bridge on the site, and it will cost $55 to $60 million. This particular project will be funded by the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. Bidding for the project is scheduled to be complete by fall of 2024. The final phase of reconstruction on the Columbia Canal will cost $45 million and will allow for water to be taken directly from the Broad River in order to create another water source for the canal. 75% of this project is funded by the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program. which operates under the Federal Emergency Management Association. The other 25% will come from Columbia Water customers. The bidding for the project is planned for the second quarter of 2024. Massive weather events like the Thousand-Year Flood, infrastructure recovery, and environmental impacts receive the majority of media attention due to the long-term efforts to restore normalcy. The reality is that the human aspect of disaster is often quantified and understood through the scientific and statistical lens rather than given the full perspective that it deserves. In this section, I will attempt to examine the human aspect through a human lens. 9 people died within Richland County itself, and in all, the weather event caused 19 fatalities according to the National Weather Service. Alexandria Murray Holmes, a 2013 USC graduate who was the youngest at 24, Timothy Gibson, who was 45, an SCDOT worker who was traveling in a truck that was overturned and swept away by the flood waters. He left behind his 3 children and wife. Robert McCarthy was 78 and was a former veteran. He served in both the Korean and Vietnam Wars. Melissa Lee Hall was 35, a mother of 2, and a devoted wife. Co-workers said they could hear her smile and kindness in every call she took. Robert Edens Alawas was 60 years old and died trying to help others from the flooding and tragedy that came along with it. Richard Milroy was 82 and was found deceased in his vehicle on Peoples Street in Columbia. 30-year-old Samson Pringle went missing during the floods, and unfortunately, he succumbed to the deadly conditions. He was a father of 2 and a fiancé. The floods also resulted in the deaths of 2 railroad subcontractors who were working away from home. 53-year-old Ricky McDonald of Ohio, who was a husband, a minister, and a father of 6, as well as Robert Vance of Kentucky. Both were employees of the R.J. Corman Railroad. The most heart-wrenching part of the entire situation is that although all these tragedies took place in such a short time and small geographic area, their long-lasting effects will not soon be forgotten. Multiple children are growing up fatherless or motherless. Many lost their life partners. While death in itself is not necessarily a tragedy, the unfortunate confluence of death and tragedy has resulted in traumatic and life-altering consequences for people from Columbia, South Carolina, all the way to Ohio. Not to even mention the friendships, connections, and experiences that were lost because of the event. While the emotional impact of these storms is often overlooked because of the personal and private sphere in which grieving occurs in our culture, it cannot be overstated how important the human aspect of tragedy is to properly understand the full extent of disaster. I think that creating these videos allowed the 2 of us an opportunity to look back at our preteen years and reanalyze the Thousand-Year Flood with a deeper understanding of the events surrounding it than we had as kids. Both Josh and I lived in the Columbia metro area during the event, but we both thankfully were not in the hardest hit areas. I also feel that the city of Columbia needs some sort of monument or statue to honor the people who lost their lives due to the floods. With multiple projects being undertaken in and around the Columbia Canal and Riverfront Park in the near future, I think that as the damage on the landscape is finally healed, that the city and county should come together for those who never got the chance to heal.